My name is Diana Whitmore, and I turned 58 this November. That feels strange to say out loud. Not because I'm ashamed of the number, but because somehow I thought life would feel fuller by now. At this age, you think you know who you are. But as I sat there, on that particular New Year's Eve, in the soft glow of our living room, surrounded by things that had once felt like mine, like us, I realized I might not know myself at all. I was born and raised in Connecticut, not far from where I still live now. A modest colonial with gray shutters and a creaky back porch that always needed repainting. Michael and I moved in the summer of 1992, 3 months after we got married. I remember the day the moving truck arrived. He was sweating through his undershirt, arms full of boxes, grinning like a kid who couldn't believe he finally owned something. I carried a single vase, a wedding gift from my aunt, and whispered to myself, "This is where we begin." And we did begin, truly. For 3 decades, we built something that looked like a life. There were ups and downs, sure, no fairy tale, but no tragedies either, just a steady rhythm. We didn't have children, not by choice, and not by failure either, just life's way of carving a path you didn't see coming. There was a time I thought I'd never be okay with that, but somehow, with Michael, I learned to adjust my dreams. Or maybe I just tucked them away. Michael worked in insurance, then later transitioned into consulting for tech companies. He wore blazers even on weekends and always kept his shoes spotless. I used to tease him that he was the only man I knew who wiped his steering wheel with disinfectant wipes. He used to smile at that. As for me, I was a librarian. I spent 27 years in the same public branch before they downsized during the pandemic. I loved it. I loved the silence of books, the smell of old pages, and the occasional child who wandered into the adult section out of curiosity. When I was laid off, I didn't cry. I remember Michael bringing home a bottle of Merlot that night. He said it was time for me to rest, to enjoy myself. I remember thinking, is rest something you enjoy when you haven't finished what you came here to do? Still, I adapted. I always adapted. I started knitting again, baked too much, and kept the house tidy to the point where it felt like a showroom. I met friends for lunch. I volunteered at a local reading program. I kept busy, or tried to, while Michael's life stayed full of travel and client dinners. He always had something new to chase, but New Year's Eve was ours. It had been for 31 years. No matter where he traveled, no matter what deals he was closing or who he was meeting with in Zurich or London or LA, he was always home for New Year's Eve. That was our unspoken contract. I never had to ask. He never had to promise. He simply was there, and we had our tradition every year. I would cook something simple but elegant, mushroom risotto, scallops if I could find them fresh. I'd light the same cinnamon-scented candles I bought in bulk every December. I'd polish our champagne glasses, the ones with the thin gold rim given to us by his mother, who called them regal. And then we'd sit by the radio. Not the TV, no, not for us. We had an old radio tucked in the corner bookshelf, the kind that still picked up jazz stations. There was one in particular, 103.7 FM, that played old standards and big band music every New Year's Eve. Glenn Miller, Ella, Nat King Cole. It felt like magic. That night, December 31st, 2023, everything was just the same. The snow was soft and slow outside. The candles flickered, giving the room that gentle amber glow. The risotto was perfect. I'd stirred it with patience, humming along to a melody I couldn't quite name. Michael was in the study for most of the afternoon, making a few calls, he said. I didn't think much of it. He came out around 8, clean-shaven, in his navy blue sweater, the one I bought him 5 Christmases ago. He looked calm, almost too calm. We ate, we laughed a little. He complimented the wine. At 11:50, as always, I brought out the champagne. I placed the two glasses on the marble tray. He took the bottle with familiar ease, peeling back the foil with those careful fingers, as if opening a letter from the past. I watched him, and for a second, just a second, I thought, God, we've made it. 31 years. But that second didn't last, because what happened next would redraw the line of my life, everything before it and everything after. But I didn't know that yet. I just saw his fingers twist the cork, heard the quiet pop, and watched as the bubbles fizzed and settled. He stood. I remember thinking that was unusual. He usually stayed seated. We clinked glasses and then kissed. But this time he stood, glass in hand, and he said, I have something special for you. I smiled. I had no idea those would be the last words he'd ever say to me as my husband. The glass in my hand felt cool, and the champagne sparkled like it always did. But that night the bubbles seemed distant. Michael's voice didn't sound quite like his own, though I didn't catch that at first. I was still smiling, watching him with that soft, expectant look I'd always given him when he said something like that. It was a moment between us, something special, like our own private joke, the way he would always say things like, I have a surprise for you, when really it was just another lovely, mundane thing. A new book, a trip to the countryside, a bottle of perfume, the little things that made our years feel like a conversation back and forth. But this was different. I have something special for you, he repeated, almost too carefully, as he placed the bottle of champagne on the table and then, to my surprise, reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. My eyebrows furrowed slightly. He didn't carry things around in his blazer pocket, not usually. I waited for him to pull out whatever it was, still grinning like a fool, until he handed me an envelope. A plain white envelope with no markings, no decorations, nothing that indicated this was anything out of the ordinary. I laughed softly, unsure of what to expect. He had always been a bit of a jokester in his own dry, reserved way. Perhaps this was a new game he wanted to play, something to keep the evening light. He didn't smile back. He just stood there, watching me. I stared at the envelope for a moment before reaching for it. I didn't question it, not yet, not then. I tore it open slowly, my fingers trembling a little, more from the sense that something in his demeanor had changed, had shifted, than anything tangible I could grasp. Inside the envelope, there was a single sheet of paper, and then, as my eyes scanned it, I felt the world go strangely still. The words on the paper were simple, cold, almost clinical. I am filing for divorce. I'm starting a new life in Paris. The tickets are booked. The suitcase is packed. I blinked, once, twice. My lips parted, but no words came out. And then I heard his voice again. You deserve peace, Diana. You deserve to live without the weight of me. And I deserve another chance, a new chance, in Paris. He stood there, waiting. And for a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it all. If this was some kind of dream. Perhaps I had fallen asleep on the couch. Perhaps the warmth of the champagne and the glow of the fire had melted everything into some kind of illusion. Maybe he was going to laugh any second now, pull me into his arms, tell me it was a joke. Maybe we'd kiss, just like every other New Year's Eve before this one. But that didn't happen. Instead, he turned, his back to me, and walked to the hallway, where, as if the announcement hadn't been enough, I saw it. A suitcase packed and waiting. The zipper was only halfway closed, as though it had been thrown together in a hurry. A rush. And then, without another word, without looking back, he was gone. The front door closed softly behind him. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. For what felt like a long time, I just sat there, the glass of champagne still in my hand. I didn't take a sip. It wasn't the champagne that had gone flat. It was something else, something deep inside of me. I hadn't realized how much of my life had been tangled with his until that very moment. There had been us for so long, and now there was just me. I turned to the tree. The lights were blinking slowly, a pale, indifferent blue, and for some reason, they felt distant, like stars that belonged to someone else's sky. The room felt too big, too cold. A hollow echo bounced around the walls. The sound of the radio, still playing in the background, felt like an intrusion. It was all so normal. Everything was exactly how it should have been. But now, with Michael gone, it all felt wrong. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run after him and demand answers, beg him to stay, even if that meant breaking me down. I wanted to do something, but I didn't. I just sat there, my hands still holding the glass, staring at nothing in particular. The champagne warmed in my hand, the bubbles slowly fading, until the drink was nothing more than a sad, flat reminder of the night. But I didn't cry. Instead, I turned off the radio, and I sat in the silence, listening to the clock tick, each second feeling like a lifetime. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It enveloped the room like a heavy blanket, pressing in from all sides until I couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly. Time seemed to stall. It was a strange, dissociative feeling, as if the world outside of this moment had frozen, while inside me, the clock raced on, unwelcome and relentless. I stared at the glass in my hand for what felt like an eternity. The champagne, now warm, tasted bitter on my tongue when I finally took a sip. But I didn't finish it. I didn't want it. It felt like the last thing Michael and I had shared, and that glass, that stupid, ordinary glass, was now a symbol of everything I hadn't seen coming. I put it down, gently. I didn't need the alcohol. I didn't need the pretension of any of it. I only needed time, but time, as always, would do its own thing. The house felt enormous suddenly. Every room, every corner, seemed to stretch out too far, too empty. It was like I could feel the space where he should have been, where we should have been. I could almost hear the phantom echoes of our conversations, of our shared laughter over the years, but they were fading quickly now, drowned out by the silence he'd left behind. I stood up slowly. My knees felt weak, but I didn't let myself fall. No, not now, not yet. There was nothing to fall into anymore. I went to the window and looked outside. The snow was falling softly, like cotton dust. It covered the yard, the street, the world. Everything was so still, so quiet. The trees were hunched under the weight of it, their limbs heavy with the cold. I could see the faint outline of cars parked on the street, their windshields dusted with snow. Nothing moved. It felt like a picture, a postcard of everything I thought my life was. But it was all an illusion. I turned away from the window, my gaze falling to the Christmas tree, the one he'd helped decorate, the one that now stood there like a mockery of everything we'd once been. The lights blinked slower now, as if they too had given up. I reached for the remote and turned off the music. The soft jazz I had always adored. The songs that once made me feel warm, connected. Now they just felt empty. I sank back into the armchair, the one that had always been Michael's favorite. He'd loved how it cradled him when he sank into it, the way it felt like home. And yet now, I couldn't even bear to sit there. Every inch of this house, every corner, seemed tainted with his absence. His words echoed in my ears, and I couldn't seem to make sense of them. You deserve peace, and I deserve another chance. I didn't know what hurt more, the words themselves, or the hollow way he'd spoken them, as if he had been planning this for months, for years, as if it had been settled in his mind for much longer than I had realized. And yet, I didn't cry. Not then. In the days that followed, I could barely bring myself to speak. It was as though the silence had taken up permanent residence inside of me. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know how to exist without him. He had been my life, a constant, steady force. I had built my days around him, my routines, my very sense of purpose. We had built everything together, or so I had believed. But now I felt like an imposter in my own skin. January passed without a word from him. No calls, no messages, nothing. Not even a postcard from Paris. I found myself wandering the house, aimless, like I was looking for something I could never find. At night, I slept restlessly, the cold air too heavy around me. Some nights I dreamt of him, not of the man I had known for over 3 decades, but of a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone who had no place in the life we had shared. But there were no tears. The shock had settled into something else, a numbness, a kind of paralysis. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I couldn't sit here forever. So I did what I had always done when faced with something I couldn't understand. I took action. I found a job, something simple to start with, a local bookstore that needed a part-time clerk. It wasn't much, but it gave me something to fill the hours. I needed the distraction. But as I sat behind the counter, sorting through dog-eared novels and stacks of old paperbacks, I couldn't shake the thought that kept creeping into my mind. Who was I now, without him? By February, I was searching for a lawyer. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want to understand him. I wanted to understand me. Who had I become in all of this? What had I built with him that wasn't just a version of his life? The lawyer I found was sharp, efficient, and a little too eager. She made notes about my case, about the financial situation, and about Michael's sudden disappearance. But I could hear the frustration in her voice when she asked me what I wanted to do about it. She wasn't asking about the divorce. No, that was a given. She was asking what I planned to do with the betrayal. The truth was, I wasn't sure. I hadn't let myself feel anger. Not yet. I needed more time. But soon I would find it. The truth. The information came slowly at first. Little things, almost unnoticeable. A text message on his old phone that I had found tucked away in a drawer, an odd email from his accountant I intercepted by mistake, a comment from a mutual friend who had no idea what they were really revealing. Each of these small fragments of information led me closer to the truth. For the first time since the night of the divorce announcement, I could feel the tight knot of uncertainty start to loosen. I was starting to see what I had missed, or rather, what I hadn't allowed myself to see. I had always thought Michael was the steady one. He made the big decisions, the financial ones, the career choices. I had been content to let him take the lead. I trusted him in a way that, looking back, was both naive and admirable. But now that trust seemed misplaced. Through those small discoveries, I pieced together something far darker than I could have imagined. It wasn't just that Michael had left me for another woman, or that he'd sold our house without asking for my consent, or that he had disappeared with a new life and a new love in Paris. No, there was more, much more. I found out that he had sold off part of the property, the part of the house we had planned to keep for our retirement, the one we had saved for. That was the first shock. But then came the bigger revelation. He had taken out a loan against the house, one I had never agreed to. It was for the general accounts, as he'd called it in the paperwork. But as I dug deeper, I found out that the money had been used to cover not just the property sale, but also his recent lavish lifestyle. It was all starting to come together. He had planned this. I began going through old bank statements, credit card records, and tax documents, carefully sifting through everything I could find. It took hours, days. The weight of the task, the enormity of it all, began to bear down on me. But I couldn't stop now. Not when I was this close. Not when I finally understood how much I had been taken for granted. I found the signatures, his on various financial documents, all filed away as though they had been part of routine business. But they weren't. They were lies, carefully crafted, methods of hiding money, covering up debts. I saw his name on forms I had never seen before, authorization slips for loans and investments I had never approved. He had manipulated every part of our finances, every savings account, every joint venture, and had done it without a second thought to how it would affect me. I spent days with a forensic accountant, gathering everything I could. The details of his financial activity, the hidden accounts, the offshore investments, they were all carefully concealed, but they weren't invisible. Not to me. As much as I hated the task, as much as I had tried to avoid it for so long, there was something satisfying about the meticulousness of it. I was starting to understand the extent of his betrayal, and in some strange way that made me feel more in control. The shock was subsiding. It wasn't anger or outrage that I felt now. It was determination, a quiet, focused resolve. I couldn't just leave it like this, not after everything. I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything, with the house, with his new life, with his lies. He had taken enough from me. It was time for me to take something back. One evening, after hours of poring over documents, I sat back and looked at the screen in front of me. There it was, the final piece I had been searching for. A trail of money that led directly to him, hidden accounts under his name, investments I hadn't known about, and the credit lines that were open solely for his personal indulgence. I had what I needed. The lawyer's response was everything I had hoped for. "You've done the hard part. Now, we can proceed." It was more than a legal victory. It was a personal one. I had found my strength in the chaos. I wasn't the woman who had been left behind in the dust. No, I was the woman who had put the pieces together, who had reclaimed her power. But there was one last thing to do before I could begin the process of moving forward. I needed to wait exactly 1 year. I spent the months that followed with an obsessive focus. The rage that had begun to rise in me after discovering Michael's treachery had slowly transformed into something more methodical, cold, calculating. Every action I took, every decision I made, felt like a step toward something greater. But more than that, it felt like a reclaiming of my life. My lawyer, Sarah, had been invaluable, guiding me through the legal processes and helping me understand the full scope of Michael's financial crimes. We were both keenly aware of the timing. As much as I wanted to take immediate action, there was something poetic about waiting until the anniversary of that night, that moment when he had ripped everything away from me. A full year would pass. I knew the timing had to be exact. I had to give him no room for excuses, no chance to dodge the consequences of his actions. He had believed, arrogantly, that he could get away with everything, the betrayal, the deception, the lies, that he could start over in Paris and leave behind the wreckage of our life together. But he had underestimated me. He had underestimated how far I would go to reclaim what was mine. During the months of waiting, I became someone I had never known. I didn't feel the ache of loneliness anymore. I didn't feel the despair of betrayal. I felt something much stronger, resolve. I filled my time with things I had pushed aside during my marriage: painting, hiking, traveling on weekends, and rediscovering old passions. I was no longer just the woman who had stood by her husband for decades. I was Diana, fully realized, independent, capable of creating a life for herself. But I hadn't forgotten what he had done to me. Not for a second. As the year wore on, I gathered more evidence. I followed every lead, made sure the paperwork was airtight. Every signature, every hidden asset, every unauthorized transaction. There was no detail too small, no clue too insignificant. I dug deeper than I had ever thought possible. And then, just a few days before the anniversary of that New Year's Eve, I found it, a trace of money, a transfer made from one of his secret accounts to an offshore entity, an investment that he had never reported. It was a substantial sum, enough to make a difference, enough to be the final key in a legal case that would crush him. The next step was clear. I had everything I needed, all the evidence I had painstakingly gathered, and the lawyer's full support. Sarah was confident that we could file a financial investigation. It was time to set the wheels in motion. The plan was simple, yet it was years in the making. At exactly midnight, the moment that marked 1 full year since Michael had made his announcement, I would send a courier to his address in Paris. Inside the envelope would be the documents that would expose him, a subpoena to appear in court, the evidence of his financial wrongdoing, and, most satisfying of all, a letter from me. The letter would be my final message to him, the last words I would ever say to the man who had once been my husband. Happy New Year, Michael. Now really start all over again. It was perfect. It was symbolic. And it would hit him where it hurt the most, not in his heart, because I no longer cared about that. No, it would hit him in his carefully curated life, in his bank accounts, in the future he thought was waiting for him. It was time. The moment was almost here. December 31st. The sky was the same icy gray it had been the year before, though this time I noticed it. I felt it. The cold wasn't just something I tolerated, it became part of the ritual, part of the weight of what was about to unfold. It grounded me, reminded me of the stillness I had lived in exactly 12 months earlier, when Michael had shattered everything. But this time, I wasn't sitting in silence. I wasn't blinking away confusion or pretending to hear the music playing on the radio. I was fully present, and I was prepared. I had arranged everything to the minute. I had even rehearsed the timing like choreography. The envelope, the letter, the certified courier from a French legal liaison my lawyer helped me hire. It had to be midnight in Paris. When the fireworks exploded over the Seine and everyone was embracing a new year, Michael would open his door to a quiet knock and find something that didn't glitter, something that didn't sparkle, something that would dismantle the false life he had tried to build. I watched the clock as the hours passed. I had lit a few candles, not for ambiance, but for focus. There was no one to share the evening with, and that was fine. This wasn't about company or celebration. It was about closure. It was about delivering a consequence that didn't involve screaming or public humiliation, just quiet surgical justice. 11:50 p.m. I stood up and opened the window. The air was sharp. The distant sound of neighbors counting down could be heard, but I wasn't part of it. I was somewhere else, somewhere between the past and the next chapter. I took out the champagne, the same bottle we were supposed to open last year, the one I had buried at the back of the fridge. I had kept it not out of nostalgia, but out of stubbornness. I would open it, just not for him, not for us. I would open it for me. 11:59 p.m. The courier confirmed receipt of the package the day before and promised it would be delivered at midnight exactly. I trusted them. But just to make sure, I tracked the GPS from my phone. The blue dot was right at the door of the apartment in the Marais district, his new Parisian paradise. Her name, Elise, the actress, was on the mailbox now. His wasn't. But he lived there. I knew that much. 12 a.m. A message popped up. Delivered. Signed. My hand shook a little, not from nerves, from the sheer buildup of the moment. 1 year. 1 year of holding it all together, of rebuilding, of rising, of waiting. I imagined it vividly. The doorbell rings, Elise giggling in the background, half draped in some satin robe. Michael, tipsy and smug, opens the door with a smirk, expecting flowers or a gift or another admirer. But instead, the courier hands him a legal envelope. Inside, the first sheet, a subpoena to appear before a financial fraud tribunal. Then, the second, a formal audit triggered by joint marital accounts used without consent. Then the last, a handwritten letter, simple and brief. Happy New Year, Michael. Now really start all over again. I didn't need to see his face. I didn't need to hear his voice. I could picture it all too well. The confusion turning into panic, the pride collapsing into dread. His glass probably still in his hand, champagne fizzing over the rim, untouched. Let that be the moment etched in his memory. Let that be his new tradition. At home, I poured the champagne into one glass, just one. I didn't need the gold-rimmed pair we used to bring out every year. That ritual was dead. This was mine now. I raised the glass, not in a toast, not in triumph, just in acknowledgement to time, to truth, to the slow, steady return of myself. The champagne was dry, crisp, not my favorite, but symbolic. I held the flute in my hand for a long time before I took a sip. I wasn't celebrating, not exactly, not in the way people celebrate with noise, music, and confetti. I was marking something, a passage, a return, the soft jazz on the radio, the same station we used to turn on every year, filled the living room again. This time, it didn't hurt. This time, it didn't carry memories like knives under the skin. This time, it was just music, and the silence between the notes wasn't lonely anymore. It was calm. I walked to my closet. There was a dress hanging in the back, deep burgundy velvet, with sleeves that draped like liquid and a neckline that reminded me I was still a woman with presence. I had bought it for our 30th anniversary dinner. He canceled that night, said he had meetings. I wore it anyway, that one time, alone in front of the mirror, then hung it back up. Never again, I thought, but I was wrong. Tonight, I wore it, for no one, and for myself. I looked at my reflection. The lines on my face hadn't disappeared. The gray in my hair still peeked through despite my last coloring. But something had changed. Not softened, no, sharpened, focused, like a lens that had finally adjusted to the right setting after years of blur. There were no guests in my house, no Michael, no glasses clinking, no party. Just me, the woman who had once been a wife, a hostess, a shadow next to someone else's ambitions. Not anymore. That year had taken many things from me, illusions, comfort, predictability, but it had given me something greater. I had learned to walk again, emotionally, to stand where I once collapsed, to speak where I used to swallow my words. I wasn't vengeful, I wasn't bitter, but I was done pretending to be smaller than I am. I opened my laptop. Just curiosity, I told myself. I typed his name into the French court database my lawyer gave me access to. His name appeared, flagged, investigated. There was an upcoming hearing scheduled for spring. His assets were frozen for now. Elise, I read in a side note, had quietly removed her name from the lease. Perhaps their champagne had gone flat too. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. Not in a gleeful way, but in a resolved one, like someone who had finally put down a suitcase they never realized they were carrying. I stepped onto the balcony. Somewhere down the street, people were lighting fireworks. Children screamed with delight. The air smelled like snow and burnt sugar. I closed my eyes and let the cold kiss my skin. "Happy New Year, Diana," I whispered. No one answered, and that was just right. I walked back in, closed the door behind me. The candles were still flickering. The garland on the tree blinked softly, steady this time, not fading in and out like it had the year before. I sat on the couch, kicked off my shoes, and curled into the cushions. Not someone's wife, not someone's aftermath, not someone's fool, just a woman, 58, reborn and ready. The clock read 12:47 a.m., and I had never felt more alive.